podcast is back this week for UFC Vegas 58, headlined by the matchup between Rafaels. We got former champion Rafael Dos Anjos taking on the division's new blood and Rafael Fiziev. And in the co-main event, we got contender Caio Borralho fighting Armen Petrosyan. In my opinion, they could shake up this bout order a little bit. I look at the prelims; they're almost a little bit better than the main card here. But man, we got 12 fights to enjoy on Saturday, and that's about all the complaining that you'll hear from me. Last week, International Fight Week, UFC 267. Great night of fights, man. We had Cowboy retire, slobber knocker between Barberina and Lawler. Got to see Strickland knocked out early, which I know a lot of people enjoyed. But, man, once the main card, to be honest with you, a little bit of a snooze fest. The O'Malley fight, ends in a no contest with the high poke. The Volk and Max fight just wasn't even competitive, 50-45 for Volk. And then Izzy was in yet another, main event that just wasn't too exciting, man. Seems like he's maybe losing a little bit of that stardom and stuff that he had growing. But on the right side, both of our reads were on point. Both of us profited a couple units there, man. And I think we're locked in for the second half of the year.
Yeah, I think Izzy might finally get worked up for this next matchup with Alex Pereira. It seemed like he just couldn't find the motivation to really get up for these fights. But you're right, we did both end up pretty good on the night. We take a look at your card first, and I think that, one of your best bets was the Ian Gary straight bet at minus 166. He got a good closing line value, and then he also ended up being definitely the better of those two fighters. Your Volk wins rounds 4, 5, or decision at minus 105. Probably your best bet of the night. Definitely no doubt in who won that fight. And then you take into account Max's durability, and that's kind of that was a gimme right there. You did make a straight bet on Jessica Rose Clark. She ended up getting her arm snap, but you did make a good hedge at plus 500. Stolyarenko wins by submission, and the armbar ended up happening for the 8th time in Stolyarenko's career. You ended up plus 3.47 units on the night. Definitely a solid one. Looking over at my card, Alex Pereira was a straight bet of mine. Didn't get the greatest closing line value, but he ended up looking like a minus 300. Sean not shooting for that stupid takedown, man.
Hands at the tits.
Yes. My biggest bet of the night was Dricus du Plessis at minus 105. Got good closing line value, and even though it was a tough fight, I think that he clearly won it,
Absolutely.
But it was a tough fight. And then the under 4.5 rounds on the Volk Holloway. I don't know. It took a stab. I knew that Volk would be quicker than him, would probably have the better of him. But again, that max durability, can't take that for granted. So ended up the night plus 3.53 units. And both of us, big nights, hoping to continue that moving forward. In our main event, we have two lightweight contenders in Rafael Dos Anjos versus Rafael Fiziev. And I think the UFC likes this matchup, man. This is the third time that they've matched them up against each other. And, as I break this fight further down, you'll come to find out I think it's actually a really tough fight for this UFC prospect in Fiziev. Fiziev, he's 5-1, having only dropped his debut to Magomed Mustafayev. But this step up, this matchup against RDA will definitely be his biggest step up in competition. RDA kind of looking at peak condition at 37 years old, man. Not sure if he's linked up with Pereira's guy down in Brazil, but he is in excellent shape. Always been a dominant fighter and really only gets beat by these best guys in the world, man. Just kind of got caught up in the wrong weight class for the second half of his career, but now back down at 155. I think we'll see him return back to his dominant ways against any guys outside of that top six fighters at the weight class. I know Fiziev switched up camps for this fight at Sanford MMA, but as we've come to find out, might have been more money related than anything. Team Puckett, top team where he trains in Thailand, says that he owes about 3 months rent to somebody who he's been living down there. So maybe on the run more than anything. This one being a 5-rounder, I think, is the biggest advantage I see for RDA. As we saw in his last fight, even at 37 years old, he can still produce at a high level over 25 minutes with the best of them. On the other hand, still very suspect of Fiziev's cardio in general, much less over 5 rounds. Maybe that 3rd round TKO over Riddell gave people the confidence that they needed in his cardio, but not me, man. His style in general is so explosive that it's no wonder that he can't keep that pace. Throw in the fact that he's going to be forced to work in grappling exchanges that RDA initiates, and I think it's a perfect recipe for RDA to drown him down the stretch. I know Fiziev has a great takedown defense, but the experience that RDA brings to the table will be the biggest factor in him having success in his takedown attempts. His great timing, great setups, and patience, all of which we saw on display in that Moicano fight. At plus 180 or better, I think RDA is a must play, and I even like the under here. In my eyes, it covers both paths. We see the most likely path to victory for Fiziev is a KO early, and then it also banks on RDA's pressure getting to Fiziev before 5 rounds is over. Both, I think, are high likelihood, so I'm leaning RDA, and then I'm also leaning that under. How you feeling?
Yeah, so dog or pass situation to me as well. I'm definitely not laying the minus 235s out there on Fiziev right now. Whether it be at 155 or 170, like you said, RDA has legitimately fought the best there is in the world his entire career. And to see him as an underdog, even at this stage of his career, it's quite shocking. I look back through the lines, and, the guy's fought like 40-something times and 20-something in the UFC, I believe. He's been this big of an underdog 4 different times, and 2 of them come to Kamaru Usman and Khabib, 2 of the pound-for-pound greatest fighters we've ever seen. And the other times he was that big of an underdog, he stops Benson Henderson with a submission in round 1, and he dominates the champion Anthony Pettis over 5 rounds with his grappling. So, man, you let RDA go to work with the grappling, and he really is a motherfucker. And so at 170, he struggles with that. He doesn't have the size. When you go up to 170, you're fighting Usman. You're fighting a guy who's a better wrestler than you in Colby Covington. And at 155, not as much of a concern, and especially in this matchup, not a concern at all, man. You definitely not going to be getting out-wrestled. You look at RDA landing 11 takedowns in his last 2 matchups as well combined. So, the grappling heavy game plan has been there in the past, and you got to expect it to be here too. Only real concern is you got to look who RDA's fought the last 2, and it's Paul Felder, who was getting ready for a triathlon, not a fight, made weight on like a week notice to step up and fight him. And then Moicano, a guy who had just fought in like a week prior and stepped up on like a week notice to take the fight as well. So, while yes, RDA looked unstoppable with the grappling, I gotta take into consideration that maybe his opponents weren't maybe in peak physical form, something like that. Definitely not going to be able to go as hard 5 rounds as RDA was. But on the side of Fiziev, a lot of guys want to group him in with the Gamrots, the Sarukians, Ismagulovs, and I'm honestly, man, for real, I think he is a part of the division's future, but I don't know if it really is a changing of the guard situation. I'm not sure if Fiziev is really that next champion of the future. He's a little tank. Yes, he's got nasty Muay Thai with a ton of power, but you talked about it, power and the striking, and later on in the fight, the wheels tend to fall off, and you referenced the Bobby Green fight in particular, where he almost gets 10-8 in round 3, because the cardio didn't look good, and you bring up the round 3 fight with Riddell, and it's like that was a very slow-paced chess match the entire time between 2 strikers trying to find their openings. Completely different style of fight that RDA is going to be bringing here. The dude's been scheduled 5 rounds in 11 of his last 14 fights. So to be laying minus 235, even minus 200 on Fiziev, RDA has been finished twice in his 44 fight career, so he's very durable. The only time, one of the times he's been finished, I think the only time in the UFC, Jeremy Stevens in his debut, then again in his title fight against Eddie Alvarez, and he has a horrible weight cut. So, man, I'm not laying minus 200 on Fiziev here, because I promise you later on in this fight, if he has not got that finish, it is definitely going to get sketchy. But to lay money on RDA at 37, I got to see him on the scale before I want to jump on him, but it's 100% dog or pass. As far as that under you talked about, I'm getting doesn't go the distance on DraftKings at plus 110, and I think that's the absolute lock of this fight and how you should play it. In our co-main event, we have Caio Borralho taking on Armen Petrosyan. Man, fight here between 2 of the contenders. UFC is really trying to push here, and for Caio, he opened up as a minus 145, and I think if I would have gotten that type of price tag, I think it would have been pretty heavy on him here. But to see the minus 200s, to see him kind of win these fights by decisions lately, I'm not sure if I want to jump in on him just quite yet. But man, he does seem to be the brighter prospect of the 2, in my opinion. He seems to be the more complete fighter. Definitely likes to keep his range. He throws a lot of kicks as well, and he's okay with doing that because the guy's a black belt on the mat. He looks very dangerous. He hit a sweep over his last opponent in round 1. You look at him going to decision in grappling tournaments with heavyweight Jalton Almeida, staying safe there. And when he gets you to the mat, man, he's actually very good at controlling you there and not letting you get back up, which I think is going to be big for him here. Because on the feet, Armen does throw a whole lot of volume, and I think it's going to be hard to win minutes, as you saw in the Gregory Rodriguez fight with the constant volume Armen's putting out there. But hopefully he's not as stubborn as Gregory Rodriguez, who's just marching forward, trying to land the right hand. I hope he cuts the cage off and tries to really mix this fight up. But with Petrosyan, man, real athletic, long, great size for the division. I noticed he can fight real well on his back foot, landing his check left hooks when people are closing range. And he showed a damn good chin, eating shots from Gregory Rodriguez, who, Julian Marquez, Junior Park just put their lights out, and so showed a good chin, and he actually looks pretty hard to hold down in the Contender Series fight. He does get taken down a couple times, but he works back to his feet, man. And if you do take him down, you work for it. If you hold him there, you've worked even harder for it. And when he works back up to his feet, one little boop, and sometimes you're down, and that's kind of his style of fighting. But Caio, to me, man, he's a southpaw. He's going to negate a whole lot of those calf kicks that Armen's going to like to throw and rack up winning minutes. And I go back to him being just the more complete fighter. He doesn't really put himself in danger on the feet. So I think he's going to be safe on the feet. I think he's going to mix in those takedowns. Laying minus 200 on a decision fighter has cost me before. Fading Armen Petrosyan has cost me before. But I think Cal takes the decision here, man. Might end up getting on him, but I think you got a pretty strong read on this one here.
Yeah, you mentioned Caio. He's found himself in yet another co-main event slot and only his second fight for the organization. And to me, I think it's pretty clear that the UFC is wanting him to win this one. But they did give him a formidable opponent in Armen. As we kind of talked about, we're both leaning Caio, but it's pretty cut and dry how I expect him to win this at his 66 implied win probability. First, that grappling upside is huge for him. Whether he finds his way on the mat by throwing lazy kicks and those getting caught, which we saw happen in his last fight, he shoots a blast double, he lands one of those inside trips. He's got him covered everywhere on the mat. Clearly, the grappling is where I'd like for this fight to take place, but if it does stay standing, I don't think that we're completely screwed there either. On the feet, I think Caio does a great job of choosing when to enter that striking range. Like you mentioned, that piston of a left hand that he has, and it being the primary southpaw versus orthodox, that body kick and head kick, he does a great job of mixing those up as well. That plodding forward movement of Rodriguez allowed Petrosyan to land all of those counters, and although those were solid counters, that will not be there this time. I think it'll be much more of a point fighting karate match than a drag 'em out war like we saw in his last fight. Now, while Caio's distance management is top notch, he does leave himself out there a little bit. That's really my only worry here. Petrosyan, really good lead hooks, like you said, and I could definitely see one of those landing if Caio doesn't set up his takedown entries properly. So while there is some concerns on Caio's striking defense, I see him winning this fight using his grappling about 65% of the time, and then another 8% of the time on the feet. I'm giving him around a 73% win probability, so I see value in him all the way up to minus 270. I truly think that he's got him covered in most every areas, but we're talking about 185ers and a primary striker in Petrosyan with power, so you got to be cautious there. For my fight of the night, I'm choosing Michael Johnson versus Jamie Mullarkey. I just know this is going to be a great fight, man. If you look at the odds, you might start to think that this is going to be a one-sided beatdown, but I don't think that could be further from the truth. I'll be the first to say I've been on both the highs and lows of this Mullarkey train, and I've just kind of come to the conclusion that he's not that great, man. He kind of reminds me of a knockoff Davey Grant, where he's super hittable, solid wrestling in his back pocket, and they don't mind to stand and bang with anyone, sometimes to a fault. Mullarkey's coming off of a KO loss to Jalen Turner only about 4 months ago, and that alone gives me enough concern to avoid laying minus 260 regardless of the matchup. Now he's up against somebody in Michael Johnson who is kind of known for having his wheels fall off mid-fight, but also known for his insanely fast hand speed and solid wrestling himself to boot. If this fight stays on the feet, I honestly think it's going to be a cakewalk for Johnson, man. His hand speed is much faster, his ability to keep range is better, and his strikes when exiting the clinch will all be useful in hitting the very hittable Mullarkey. While the offensive wrestling edge, I would lean towards Mullarkey. I think that he's going to have a difficult time holding down Johnson for Johnson, who's known for his defensive wrestling and his ability to scramble to the feet. Plus, as we've seen from in the past from Mullarkey, that Ferocity fight comes to mind. Even when he is able to get into top position and control somebody on the mat, he struggles to produce offense of his own. And as we've seen recently, that top control is just not scoring like it used to. I see this fight playing out much closer to 50-50, so seeing Johnson above a plus 200 was a must-play for me. Even if he goes out there and lays an egg, it would take a lot of convincing to make me believe Mullarkey wins this 72% of the time, man.
So Michael Johnson has the absolute opportunity to look like a minus 250, and then till he just looks like that minus 250, man. And, for me, I think I actually am going to go on the opposite side. I'm going to take Mullarkey here in this matchup. Last week, like right after the pay-per-view, BetMGM was like the only book that I had that had Mullarkey open. It was minus 190, so I took that. I actually breaking down the fight pretty much aligns with how I see Mullarkey about 65% of the time. Now about minus 250, minus 265, that is getting up there, especially with the concerns, from the short layoff. But for me, I think you'll see right away who's the more physical, larger fighter of the two, and I think that'll be Mullarkey. The dude has got just downright insane forward pressure, and I think he's going to put MJ on the back foot extremely early. And, he doesn't need to do this because he absolutely does it every fight, man. He just needs to make it dirty. He needs to grind Mike up against the cage, maybe mix in some of those takedown attempts. And if he's going to make it a clean fight where he just tries to outpoint Mike's boxing, it's not going to end well for him, But if he can, grind on him, get that Gaethje-style fight where he's just walking him down constantly and, may get hurt a couple times, but continue just to work on him. I think for a point you're going to see Michael Johnson look good and then start to dip off later on in this fight. The hand speed, absolute biggest concern for me here, and I think it's the biggest concern early in this fight. You talked about him being like 4 months removed from not just a TKO. I'm talking like a bad TKO, man. He's like rolling around with his hands on his head and shit. Like it's bad. Yeah, it's a bad one, man. So you don't have a really idea how he's going to react to a clean shot, and his striking defense is non-existent. But at the same time, man, I think we've almost seen what Jalen Turner can do to you, man. He cracked Brad Riddell, and dude was panic shooting immediately, So I think at 6'3", that dude has some power that a lot of people are just not expecting right out the gates. And then I've seen Mullarkey just being a slobber knocker with Brad Riddell for a full 3 rounds and be able to eat just about everything. So I think it is going to be one of those situations where Michael Johnson does look good early and ends up wilting under that pressure. As much as I wanted to get on Mullarkey, I can't get there just because of the question marks, but violence is going to be my bet here. For my fight of the night, I'm going to go with Ronnie Lawrence versus Saidyokub Kakhramonov. First fight of the night, man, in my opinion, honestly, should be on the main card. Right off the bat, I think when you look at it, Ronnie Lawrence looks like the better prospect of the two. But I think Saidyokub, man, he showed us that he is a dog in his last fight, and he is not going to go away easy by no means. For Lawrence, it's almost kind of like the ideal fight style that I like to watch. It's like a bantamweight Colby Covington to an extent. It's just relentless pursuit of takedowns, great trained wrestler, make you carry his weight, and it's just that grinding style that if you do work back to your feet, you're going to be put back on your ass almost immediately, and it starts to wear on the guys, and even the constant threat of those takedowns you see allow his hands to land, dropping Manny Martinez like 3 different times in the fight, and the guy's training out of Sanford MMA, training with a great group of grapplers, and you look at his Dana White Contender Series fight and his 2 UFC fights, this guy spent more than 50% of his fights in top control. There's legitimately no secret what Ronnie Lawrence wants to do out there. But I've seen him botch a weight cut before, and I've also seen him in round 3 with Manny Martinez get dropped. I've seen him, literally look like the cardio and the wheels were falling off. The takedowns or the takedown entries were coming off the back foot, very sloppy. And so that's his style, man. And to know that that's going to drain on him and that he's proven to me that he might not be able to keep that up, just don't know if I want to lay the slight juice on him here. For Saidyokub, I talked to you, him bust on the scene in the Trevin Jones fight, and it's a pretty good little read if you don't have, if you have a quick chance to read about it. And he talked about being so poor that his dad tells him that his career's over. He flies back home to Uzbekistan and ends up getting a call from the UFC, flies over here on like 4 days' notice, gives it his best attempt to make weight. And what I can't keep out of my head is, he was basically getting grinded up on the cage, but his cardio, man, it held up. He held Trevin Jones for 1 for 8 for his takedown attempts, and all this on 4 days' notice. It gives me a bit of, a bit of concern here that maybe we're going to see a lot better Saidyokub this term around in a full camp. You look at the the bookies and how they see this fight. They've actually got Saidyokub, even though he's the dog, has the much more with the finishing upside. He's the one constantly attacking the front chokes. I think this fight is just real tricky to call. It's weird to see an underdog who has much more finishing upside than the guy that they've got favorite. So I think my pick is going to be Ronnie Lawrence. I like the style, but not really the confidence as everybody else this week.
Yeah, it's a win-win situation for the UFC, man. You know, both these guys 30 and under and undefeated in the UFC. They're just trying to weed out the prospects in an already very saturated division at 135. You talked about the stats that Ronnie Lawrence has put up. Facing guys like Vince Cachero and Manny Martinez, you're going to put up those kind of stats, you know. Saidyokub, the biggest concern that he gives me is that he's faced a much stiffer competition. Yeah. Even though he hasn't won his fights against Pipe Vargas, Umar Nurmagomedov, going the distance with Umar is a feat in and of itself.
His win over Askar, that guy was signed for a brief period as well.
Right, and then the Trevin Jones on late notice, definitely excited to see how he does on a full camp in the UFC. And sitting at plus money, it might in the future look like a gift of a line. For my fighter to watch, I chose Kennedy Nzechukwu. Coming out of Fortis MMA, we have yet another guy with the tendency to hold back. Michael Bisping was actually commentating on that, him being a slow starter in his Daeun Jung fight. We saw how that one ended up. Similarly to Uriah Hall, Kennedy does have a difficult time getting that offense started, but when he does, he looks really good at it, man. Sadly, along with being a slow starter, he's also known for having lapses in judgment, man. We saw that on display when he got caught with Paul Craig's patented third-round triangle choke and the aforementioned Jug fight where he practically stood in front of him and allowed him to just tee off. All that being said, he's a 6'6" light heavyweight with an 83-inch reach, man. The dude has a bright future if he can just get his mental game on the same level as his physical gifts. He's up against an opponent in Carl Roberson who's shared the octagon with some stiff UFC talent, former champ Glover Teixeira, Marvin Vettori. But truthfully, I think his skill set is rather limited, and he's going to be completely outsized in this matchup. Realistically, Carl, he's an out-of-shape middleweight, where Kennedy is literally in the 99th percentile for light heavyweight. Skill for skill, I slightly edge Kennedy in both striking and grappling. I know Carl, glory kickboxer, won the greatest career there, you know? Kennedy's going to be the far bigger man, snagged his money line at -105, and I think that this is a perfect opportunity for him to get back on track and kind of live up to his potential, which is why he is my fighter to watch.
Yeah, man, I think we bet this the exact same 0.75 units on Kennedy here. I think I just got a little bit worse of a line, but still a ton of value there from what I see. You talked about Carl Roberson. To me, he's definitely a middleweight, so coming up here to light heavyweight, completely outsized. He's going to want to strike with Kennedy, who I think is just going to pose too many issues, keep him behind that jab, and even like you talked about, maybe even mix in some of that grappling. So I like Kennedy as well on Saturday. For me, I'm going to go Ricky Tercios for my fighter to watch. You know, he's the Ultimate Fighter winner. To be honest with you, I'm not quite sure why he's not on the main card. You know, he's actually become a pretty fan favorite. The dude's a character. A lot of people seem to like him. He does split his gym up. I know he trains down in Texas there with Alex Morono, but he also does a whole lot of work with Team Alpha Male, and I think that's a great gym for Ricky Tercios. He has that wrestling-based style where he likes to take the fight to the mat. Team Alpha Male has so many fighters in that 135, 145 weight class for him to be working with, and you know, for a guy that tends to like to go to the judges like Ricky Tercios does, Team Alpha Male, they get pretty generous judges' decisions a lot of times as well. But in this fight in particular, I do expect Ricky to have the advantages in a lot of the areas here. He might not be as technical of a striker of the two, but he's going to absolutely overwhelm him with his constant volume. He throws like triple the strikes of Ayman Zahabi. And then you mix in the wrestling advantage that Ricky's going to have. Phenomenal gas tank. I'm really excited to see the improvements that Ricky's made. He's been out almost a year since winning Tough, and I think they've given him a pretty favorable matchup to kind of get his UFC started. Nothing too tough for him here. I got in early on Ricky Tercios. I got -2 units on him at -178, -200 on the same book right now. So, man, Ricky, just go out and do your job, brother.
Yeah, man. So like Ricky, he's one of these guys where He's an oddball, man. You know, you don't really know what to expect from him. Somebody on Twitter earlier this week had compared him 135 Tony Ferguson, and I love that comparison, man. Both mentally, and then you throw in the wrestling, and not really being the most technical of strikers, but the pressure it gets to people. He breaks people. And I think that this is a great opportunity for him to do it against somebody in Amin Zahabi. Not too high on, man. I think I actually picked him to beat Draco Rodriguez in his last fight, but outside of that, there's not very many people at 135 that I have Amin Zahabi winning over. I do think that this is a setup fight for somebody who just won the Ultimate Fighter. The UFC is going to look to get him at least a couple of wins to secure the legitimacy of the show. Right. So conspiracy theory-wise, I'm also on Ricky Tercios, and I think he should get it done. So for my underdog, I just talked about 3 different ones, but the one I think that has the most value is RDA. I don't think RDA has given us any reason to be a plus 180 against any lightweight outside of the top 6. He's back down at his camp in Brazil, and whatever he's been eating down there is working. In his most recent fight, he's proved he can go 5 rounds, so that was nothing new. He put on an excellent performance against Moicano. He's up against, truthfully, an unproven prospect, in my opinion. I mean, you tell me how somebody in the top 10 on a 5-fight win streak at 155 has managed to avoid the Demirs, the Gurams, the Gamrots, the Armens, the Turners, the Gillespies, etc. You know, I mean, I just like how do you end up as pick'ems against Brad Riddell, and then in your next fight you're a 2-1 favorite against RDA at 155? That's just never going to make any sense to me. You throw on top of the fact that Fiziev's never been in a 5-round fight, has shown undeniable cardio issues in recent 3-rounders. It's a no-brainer that RDA's a solid dog spot here. Even if he doesn't win, I think that he covers that price tag.
Yeah, so I didn't get there with you. I ended up just playing doesn't go the distance at plus money because of the finishing upside for both. But yeah, dude, RDA is absolutely a live underdog in this fight for all the reasons you said. In particular, for me, I talked about 11 of his last 14 fights being 5-rounders. The guy's got a gas tank that Fiziev cannot dream of having, and also the ability to mix in those takedowns, which is just going to eat at that cardio that Fiziev's just not had tested before, man. Even in the Bobby Green fight and the Riddell fight, there's very little takedowns at all mixed into that. And so, dude, 180 could seem like a gift on RDA come Saturday. I struggled this week really to find one, but I'm going to go with Courtney Casey as my underdog this week, looking to make it 5 actual events in a row that I've been able to give out a plus money underdog winner here. But like I said, man, I did struggle to actually find one that I'm as passionate about as I've been. But I also got to choose between Cynthia Calvillo and Antonina Shevchenko as who I want to fade more, and they have both been absolute money makers for me in the past. For Antonina, typically when I fade her, it comes to girls who are a little bit higher in the division, Jessica Andrade, Caitlin Chukagian, things like that. But for Antonina, I really do think she is an easier fighter to game plan for. And if Courtney Casey has even the slightest bit of an intelligent game plan, I know I said this with Sean Strickland last week, but if she has any type of an intelligent game plan, I think plus 150 could look absolutely live on Saturday. But, the only issue is my girl Courtney Casey's landed 3 takedowns in her entire 14 UFC fight career. So it's almost evidence that, against her here. But KGB Lee, Chukagian, they're not really wrestlers either. They're known for their strike, and they just went out there and put on a wrestling clinic against Antonina. And so on the feet, this girl's not her sister. You do not have to worry about the same volume, the same power coming back your way. I think Casey's going to equal her in the volume as well, be able to keep it close enough on the feet that if she does land a couple takedowns, it's going to make this fight close. So I doubt I might get to track Courtney Casey here, but I think a lot of the favorites are actually going to win on Saturday. But a fight that I feel like is going to go 15 minutes, a girl who's going to be struggling with takedowns, a girl in Courtney Casey who I think's out of the MMA lab. Good coach, man. It's dog or pass for me here.
Yeah, so, just Antonina Shevchenko at the current odds, you see the comeback at plus 155. You might as well bet that on principle, man. But it looks like there are actually people betting Antonina Shevchenko up to a 2-1 favorite. So if you just sit back, Courtney Casey's number continues to climb. And like you said, in a greasy girl fight, I think that the underdog is always the play. For our prop bet section, we both kind of talked about the main event enough to where we're not going to mention this one, but we both really like that under in the main event. We just don't see any way that that's seeing the judges. So besides that one, my prop bet of the evening is going to be the over 2.5 in the Tertios versus Ayman Zahabi fight. It's sitting at -165. I think that this should be well over -200. Both guys, Tertios has more of the finishing upside than Zahabi, in my opinion. Zahabi's much more comfortable with sitting behind a jab for 3 rounds. Tertios is going to push that pace, but I just don't think that he has as much finishing potential as he does have the potential to like break somebody if they give way. I don't know if that really makes sense, but I don't see Tertios knocking anybody out, and I don't think that he's just going to straight out grapple Zahabi to where he's going to submit him. So over the course of 3 rounds, I think that Tertios will get the better of him, but I do think that it's going to take him 3 rounds to do that. So the over 2.5 -165, when that drops on DraftKings, FanDuel, I'll definitely be taking a look at it. But on BetOnline -165, I think there's great value.
Yeah, I really dig that as well. Both of their styles lean toward decision. I think Tercios' decision in both the Ultimate Fighter fights and the one with Brady Heistead in the finale, and I think you're only getting a line like this because Zahabi just went out there and put Draco away in the first round. But and if styles make fights, man, this seats the judges, in my opinion, like, God, 80% of the time, right. For my favorite prop, going to go with Michael Johnson and Jamie Mullarkey doesn't go the distance. Doesn't go the distance is pretty much just kind of our style, been burnt on that last 2.5 minutes a couple times, I've usually been all right with laying the extra juice depending on how much it is. So I say doesn't go the distance, but I know there's like a -175 on the under 2.5. I checked the doesn't go the distance, and it was like -245. So we're talking about 70 points there. I think that's where you just kind of have to pick and choose which one you want to choose. But this has violence written all over it, in my opinion. Johnson 100% prefers to keep this fight in boxing range where he's best. Mullarkey's just a flat-out dog, willing to get in a war, eat one to give one. So I think you and I did a great job earlier breaking the fight down to pretty much give you a reason why we think this has value on it here. Johnson absolutely been known to break against guys who have that style of Mullarkey, who can withstand the damage, walk him down, and break him late. But if Mullarkey's chin can't hold up from that short layoff, he's also struggled with the speed and type of fighters like MJ, who have the better boxing and have the hand speed. So I think it goes one of 2 ways here. I think MJ's hands are extremely way too fast, and you see Mullarkey coming back way too soon from the Jalen Turner fight, and I think you see a first-round knockout. If not, I think you see Jamie Mullarkey withstand that first-round pressure and break Michael Johnson in rounds 2 or 3. So either way, doesn't go the distance. I'll be highly shocked if this goes fully 15. As far as some statistics behind it, they finish at a 72% of the time combined. Even if you have to pay -200 there, you're still getting some slight value. So, man, whether you do take -200 something for doesn't go the distance, -175 for under 2.5, you got a good chance of cashing that.
For my best bet of the night, I'm going Caio Borralho. I still think he's undervalued at his current price tag, even though it's been moving in his favor all week. I think he's going to be the faster, higher IQ fighter with a far more well-rounded game than his opponent. If he's able to get this fight to the mat, I think that he'll likely dominate. And if it's on the feet, I still think he has a good shot at winning. The UFC obviously kind of weeding out who's the better prospect in middleweight. And honestly, I think that Caio's the goods. A Brazilian, he has the Lyoto-esque striking mixed with the Maya grappling and a legitimate large frame for the division. I don't think it's going to be an easy fight by any means, but barring a KO from Petrosyan, which is +330 and definitely a hedgeable spot right there, I don't see any clear path to victory for Armen, where I see multiple paths to victories for Caio. So he's definitely going to be my best bet for the week.
I dig it, man. He's definitely like 6'1" and not 5'10" as well. So Let's get that settled as well. But, brought him back after the Contender Series win over, I think it was Aaron Jeffrey, right, who was also a very, very good fighter. And so to bring him back, UFC wanted him. They gave him that easy guy to get the first-round finish over, so it was a no-brainer to sign him. You talked about, second, I think, co-main event for him. UFC likes him, man. He talked his fight IQ, more complete fighter. Talking me into probably parlaying him, doubling down on my best bet here in Said Nurmagomedov. So I dropped 3 units on Said at minus 225 on FanDuel when it opened, and that's at minus 290 at the moment. So definitely getting some value there, and I think this is a phenomenal matchup, a very favorable matchup for Said. The guy looked phenomenal in his comeback. It was like a year and a half layoff before he fought Cody Stamann, and I mean, dude, there was just no debate. He was just a flat-out better fighter that night. I mean, destroyed him on the feet. Takedown defense looked incredible. Snatched up the guillotine. And I think it's going to be the same here. You know, it's 100% better striker than Andrade. It's a step down from Cody Stamann, you know, honestly. So with Said, the strikes just come from different angles, man. He's out there throwing spinning attacks, tries to throw spinning elbows when you're closing distance, throws that spinning kick to the body where he finished Ricardo Ramos with it. I talked about the takedown defense that against Cody Stamann. Stamann got in on a good single leg, showed great balance, turned it into a nasty front choke, and I really see and struggle to find success where Douglas has it here. You know, if he's going to stay on the feet, the dude's got a lot of distance he's going to have to, you know, to close, and the speed difference between these two guys is going to be flat out unreal. Just going to have way too much volume to get past, and then for Douglas to have, I think, 32 fights I'm seeing now. He's got 2 submission wins over his entire career. The guy's not much of a threat on the ground. And for Said, I think it's going to take a dominating wrestler to put him on his back. You're not going to outstrike this guy. So I think Said wins this fight, no joke, 70-75% of the time. I think anywhere between minus 225 and 300 to where I cap this guy, and there's value. So very comfortable putting him on a parlay.
So I'm still upset about trying to
yeah,
laid my first 6-unit bet on Sergey Morozov, thought that I was in the clear after that first round, and then Douglas Da Silva ended my dreams. So I'm still a little hesitant to try and fade on Andrade, but I did end up only putting 1 unit, kind of just tailing your pick. And but I just can't invest too much. But as far as him being the best bet, like you said, all the paths to victory are there, and I don't really see an area outside of straight power that Andrade has an advantage in. For our quick pick section, we start the night off in the bantamweight division where we see Ronnie Lawrence taking on Saidyokub Kakhramonov. I'm going to go with Saidyokub here. I really want to go with Ronnie Lawrence, a Tennessee boy, but I think Saidyokub is a little underrated here.
So I'm torn here, man. I think I'm going to go with Ronnie Lawrence. I like the style. I think he could bank 2 rounds like the Manny Martinez. The 3rd round's always super sketch. Moving all the way up, 205 pounds, Kennedy and Saidyokub taking on Carl Roberson. You and I both own Kennedy here, so I think minus 105, minus 128, good value on him.
Yeah, totally agree. Moving on, it just got announced, David Onama versus Garrett Armfield in their rematch, actually. Onama's a minus 800 here. He's the much bigger guy out of the two, and I do think he's going to get the win.
I think Onama finishes him this time as well. Going up to 185, we got Cody Brundage versus Tresean Gore. Fight that I haven't looked into too much, to be honest with you. Tried to back Tresean Gore last time, and dude just doesn't let his hands go. So give me Cody Brundage with a couple takedowns to beat him here.
Yeah, if Gore does let his hands go, though, I think that he could definitely knock out Cody Brundage. Doesn't really set up those takedowns well, but he does go to that wheelhouse often. I'm going to go Tresean Gore here to kind of make a comeback. Moving on, we go to Antonina Shevchenko versus Courtney Casey. I know Casey's your dog, but I am going to slightly lean Shevchenko here, although I'd never lay that price.
Yeah, you can't hate it. This is just a low-level women's MMA fight. Give me Courtney Casey. Ayman Zahabi, Ricky Tercios. You already know my 2 thoughts here. 2 units, Ricky Tercios.
Yeah, I'm also on Tercios here. I think he should walk through Zahabi. Moving on to the flyweight division and a regretful bet I've already made on Cynthia Calvillo. I do think that I'm going to edge her out here. Nina Nunez being past her prime, but, Cynthia Calvillo.
Yeah, man, way past her prime, had a child, just did Ultimate Fighter. Cynthia's been a fade of mine, but I think she gets back on track here. Michael Johnson, Jamie Mullarkey. Doesn't go the distance is my pick here, but I think we're going to be split on here. I'm going to go Jamie Mullarkey.
Yeah, I like Michael Johnson to get this one done. Like I said in the breakdown, I think it's closer to 50-50, but at the current price tag, Michael Johnson's the play. Moving on, Jared Vanderaa versus Chase Sherman. I'm having to talk myself out of not laying the juice on Jared Vanderaa because I do think that he's a better fighter than Chase Sherman. I think that if this fight ends up on the mat, it's all Vanderaa, but it's hard to play him.
Yeah, and I'm with you. For a big guy, Vanderaa got some pretty good gas tank, and the dude can absolutely eat a shot on the feet.
Durability for sure.
And so I'm not really worried about Chase knocking him out, to be honest with you. I think Chase is going to fade down the stretch and get submitted late in the second or third round. Said versus Douglas Silva de Andrade. Yeah, huge on Said here, man.
Yes, I'm also on Said here, just timid. Timid because of Andrade. The co-main event, we have Caio Borralho versus Armen Petrosyan. Caio is my best bet of the night. I think that he's got Armen covered.
I think I'm going to listen to you as well, man. I'm going to go Caio in the co-main event. And in the main event, we got Rafael versus Rafael. I'm going to go, this is tough, man. This is tough. If you want my value, it's definitely RDA. Stay with it, man. Give me RDA.
Yeah, I like it. RDA's my dog shot as well. I think this is Fiziev's biggest step up in competition. I expect RDA to show him what the higher upper echelon of 155 truly is.
Yeah, I think he's got to finish him earlier, or we see RDA take over. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us. Onama back on. We're up to 12 fights. Hope they all stay together. We'll see him make weight on Friday. We'll catch these fights on Saturday. See you next week.
Peace.